Hello, and welcome to part 2 of this series on personal transformation. And good to have a couple of new faces as well into the conversation. So today we are going to be speaking about the idea of frames, mental frames, mental, psychological, emotional frames that all of us hold, and how that plays a role in transformation, and how do we need to actively work with those frames in the process of any transformational journey that we intend to undertake. So the intent of this particular series of talks on personal transformation is to be able to look at using various kinds of tools that involve human process work, conscious, unconscious process work. So working with our psyche, our mental processes, our emotional processes in an active manner, so as to be able to cause any kind of transformations that we may want to have in life. These transformations, of course, begin with a mental shift, and then they can also at some point in time lead on to a physical shift. It could lead to an emotional shift, healing, and so on. But the transformation journey in general begins with a mental shift. So that's where the intent of the series is. So the first part of the series, we had looked at a process of using the language of needs, in the sense of how do we tap into the layer of our needs. So all of us have a thought layer, which we are usually aware of. We are aware of what we think. Sometimes we are also aware of what emotion leads to that thought. And yet there is also a deeper layer of needs which leads to a certain emotion. And when needs are unfulfilled, then they sometimes play havoc with our emotions and thoughts. And therefore the idea is to look at, if you're looking at transforming any aspect of our lives, how do we tap into our needs first and then speak from there, instead of just speaking with our thoughts, because our thoughts may not always give a direction in terms of where we are in life and what is it that we are trying to do. They can be misleading if not understood well. So that was the first part. Today, independent of that process, is a different process around frames. So this person called Timothy Galway happens to be a tennis coach. Okay, so his job in life is to train people who want to work in tennis in a professional manner. So they play tennis professionally. So early in his life, he used to coach the way most tennis coaches work, which means he would tell them what is technically the right stance to use, how do you serve in the correct way, how do you respond in the right way, how do you manage your body, your exercises, and all of that. And he realized that in this process, if a player has to change his or her style or his or her response to the way a ball is coming in, it sometimes takes a lot of hard work to overcome one's natural style. Each player has his or her own natural preferences, and for those of us who watch tennis, we see that different players play in very different ways. The physical posture and response is very different, right? Some of them are more defensive, some of them attack, some of them have a lot more energy, they run around the court, some of them tend to be more stable. And it's very difficult to change one's natural style, right? So he realized that there needs to be some kind of a shift in order to make this easier for players. So if a player's technique is not working, how do you make sure that you make the shift, but you also make the shift easy? It's not something that should take months or years to work on. So at one point in time, one of his players was having trouble in terms of responding to a backhand. And he said, instead of looking at the technicalities of the backhand and looking at the angle of your elbows and how you're holding your racket and all of that, instead of that, just be aware of the ball. So if the simple process that seems to be missing is that the player, for example, misses keeping his eye on the ball, and that's very important in a game like tennis or cricket for that matter, right? The player can't lose sight of the ball. Even for a split second, if you look someplace else or you lose track of the ball, you're too late in terms of response. The ball could land anyplace else. So in order to be able to overcome this piece about not missing the ball, instead of telling the player, you have to keep the eye on the ball, and repeating it, and that doesn't really work, what he told one of his players once was, every time a ball bounces on the court, whether it's on your side or the opponent's side, every time the ball bounces, you vocally, loudly say bounce. And every time somebody hits the ball, either you hit the ball or your opponent hits the ball, you vocally say hit. Right? So what happens in the process is, because I have to say hit or bounce every time the ball is hit or bounced, I have to pay attention to the ball. Right? So it's no longer a process of not missing the ball, have to keep an eye on the ball. It is a process of looking at, is the ball being hit or is the ball bouncing? And therefore, the game changes. Right? It's no longer the tedious process of cannot lose sight of the ball. It is more the active process of saying I have to say bounce or hit, and therefore I have to keep an eye on the ball indirectly. Right? And the inner game shifts. So Timothy Galway is also a proponent of what he calls the inner game process, and what he realized through this mode of coaching tennis was that anytime we are playing a game, right, where it could be a game like tennis, or it could also be the larger game of life, which means we are either studying or working, or we are managing a relationship, or speaking or talking to a friend. Any of these games, there is an outer game, which means we are performing an activity, but parallelly there is also an inner game. Right? And for a tennis player, the outer game is, yes, playing tennis, which means keeping an eye on the ball, but there is also an inner game which probably is saying, oh my God, it's such a tedious process to always keep an eye on the ball. And instead, if you shift the inner game to say, hey, I have to say bounce or hit, and make the inner game fun, then the outer game naturally takes shape. Then it's no longer a tedious process of keeping an eye on the ball, but an active process of saying bounce, hit, bounce, hit. Right? So he was the first person to speak of this concept that there is an inner game that's constantly happening, and the inner game is the area of our frame. Right? It is that inner frame which says, I am good at keeping sight of the ball, or I am not good at keeping sight of the ball. And if my inner frame says I'm not good at keeping sight of the ball, then no matter how hard I try, I will not be, at some point I will slip, and it's going to be a huge effort. Instead, if I shift that, if I take away that frame which says not good at keeping sight of the ball, and just keep saying, okay, I just have to simply say bounce or hit, that's all. The inner game becomes very simple. The outer game becomes very efficient, because now it's fun. It's no longer about keeping sight of the ball. It's about watching out for hits and bounces. Right? So the proposition Timothy Galway makes is that anytime you want to cause transformation outside, which means you want to perform better in your studies, or have a better conversation with your spouse, or do better at work, look at what's the inner game and shift the inner game along with the outer game. Only shifting the outer game will not work, because yes.
How can I focus more?
So look at what is the inner frame when you're doing work on computers, for example, right? So if the idea is that concentration, if your focus wavers, your concentration shifts, right? Or that's a challenge. The outer task is, changing the outer game will mean trying to somehow focus on the computer and it work, but it can be difficult, right? It's not that you're intentionally wavering your focus, it happens. So look at what is the inner game, what is the inner frame while you're working on computers. Is the frame saying something like, oh God, it's such a tedious task and I have to do this, and I have to do this for money, or I have to do it for whatever other reason, there's a deadline. Is that what the inner frame is saying, and is there a way to shift that frame, right? Either shift it and replace it with something else altogether, or look at how do we manipulate the frame, how do we reframe, right? So there are both options possible, right? So that's the concept of a frame. So when you're speaking of the computer example, the frame could be about the fact that this is a hard task and it needs to be done and there is a deadline. Maybe that is the possibility of a frame. So if we are to shift frames or to work beyond these frames, here is an equation, right? Any kind of a performance in life, whether it's in an exam or at work or in a relationship, a performance is equal to potential minus the interference. The interference is the internal dialogue that's happening that says I'm not good enough, or I don't do this well, or I'm not confident, or this is boring, I'm tired. All of these are interferences that we work with, right? And these interferences come in the way of our potential maximizing and actually resulting in performance. So there are two ways to increase performance, therefore, in this equation. You either work hard to increase your potential, which means you study more, you work harder at your job or your relationship, have more conversations. That's one way of doing it. The other way of maximizing performance is to decrease the interference. So the increasing of potential will mean a lot of hard work, right? And it's not a wrong way, it is sometimes a great way as well, in the sense that you maybe gain more skills through something, you train yourself to do something better, you practice a lot more. That is certainly a feasible way. However, in parallel, also look at how do we reduce the interference, because it cannot only be about hard work. You have something to say, sir? Okay. Right. So how do we minimize the interference? And the working on the interference is about dropping the frames. It is about dropping that inner conversation, that inner game that's happening as you're playing that outer game. Right. So there are multiple approaches to working with frames. One, as I said, and I will share a process for it, is called reframing, which works through the principle of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. Right? That's one way to do it. The other is to be able to mentally recognize frames and to be able to drop it. So at any activity that you're doing, so let's say, for example, if I'm doing a data entry job on a computer and I'm finding it tiring, right, and therefore my focus wavers, right? The idea is to first recognize what's my frame, right? How do I look at, what's the window through which I'm looking at this job, right? That's a simple way of defining frames. What's the window through which I'm looking at this relationship, this work, this person, right? And articulate that window, which means you say that, okay, I'm doing this work on this computer and my focus wavers, my attention shifts, and maybe it is because I think of it as just a job, or maybe it is tiring, maybe it is monotonous. The frame could be different for different people. So the first step is to recognize what that frame is, what is the inner game that's being played as you're playing that outer game of data entry. And then look at, can I drop that frame altogether? Is it possible for me to shift that inner conversation and say, instead of me keeping this constant dialogue of saying, oh God, this is boring, oh God, I have to get this done, oh God, there's this deadline, instead of that, can I in some way shift the frame and make it fun? Maybe I can look at how quickly can I get this done and challenge myself and see, yesterday I took 1 hour to enter this much amount of data, maybe today I can do it in 45 minutes and create a challenge around it. That's one way of shifting the frame. The other is to look at, as I'm entering this data, let me look for faults in the data, let me look at mistakes. And while the frame is about constantly looking for mistakes, your attention will stick because you're looking for a certain task of mistakes in the data. Right? So there are multiple options you can give yourself to shift that frame or to drop it altogether. Right? But yes, the idea is first to recognize what that interference is, what that frame is. Right? And a simple way of defining the frame is think of it as a window and through which you're looking at a certain task. Right? So if you're looking for a frame in a relationship, imagine the person that you're considering and look at the window through which you look at that person. What are the assumptions I make when I deal with this person? Do I think of this person as being nice, helpful, generous, or do I think of this person as difficult to deal with? I have to control this person, I have to somehow manage and get this meeting done with. What is the frame that I'm approaching this conversation with? And can I in some way shift the inner game so that the outer game becomes easier? Okay. So another thing that I want to bring into this conversation about frames is the idea of what are called technical challenges and adaptive challenges. Now this is a leadership construct which Ronald Heifetz speaks about. His proposition is that in leadership, business leadership, as well as in general life, there are a lot of challenges which can be technical in nature. Technical in the sense there is a single answer to it. It's an objective problem. So for example, if the bulb blows here, it's a technical challenge. The answer to it is to replace the bulb, right? That's a simple thing. There is no other way to go about it. Or if I happen to fall down and break my foot, the only way is to go ahead, get it bandaged, and let the process of healing happen and let the bone take its time to heal. It's a technical challenge, and there's one way to fix it, right? However, a lot of challenges in our life are not technical. They are what he calls adaptive challenges, right? Adaptive challenges are challenges that are, in simple ways, very human in nature, which means there is no one fixed answer. The challenge is not superficial by nature. It is not something as simple as replacing a light bulb, right? It could have deep layers of emotion involved. It could have culture coming in as a factor. It could have beliefs coming in as a factor. And therefore, we cannot respond to an adaptive challenge with a technical solution. Okay? For example, so let's say if I have a problem of high blood pressure, right? If you look at it as a technical challenge, I can say, let me pop a pill and lower the blood pressure, right? That's one way of dealing with it. However, will it become a cure for my blood pressure? It can't be unless I change my lifestyle, right? It can be temporary. Yeah, today I might feel better, but tomorrow if I continue the same lifestyle, same food, same lack of exercise, or whatever other things happen in my life, the challenge will continue. So it's not so much a technical challenge, it is an adaptive challenge. I need to do a lot more than popping a pill for me to be able to effectively deal with high blood pressure, right? Which means I need to adapt, and I need to adapt at the level of perhaps food. I need to adapt in terms of lifestyle, maybe get some time to, sit calmly, meditate, take a walk, manage my stress. Maybe I need to look at, operating my daily schedule differently in a manner that my body is more at ease. Probably look at dealing with other ailments that could also be causing the blood pressure. So it can't be a one answer. That one answer will be very technical, and it'll only be a short-term solution, if at all, right? So when we're dealing with adaptive challenges, technical frames don't work. And that's an invitation for us to explore here in terms of there are sometimes challenges in life that we think of fixing, but we use a technical frame to fix it, right? So for example, if I don't like dealing with a certain person, the frame I may use is to say, oh, it's difficult for me to deal with this person because I don't like him, right? Or worse, blame the person and say, because he is rude, I don't want to deal with this person, right? Now that's a technical frame. Does it solve my problem? It doesn't, because this person still exists in my life and I need to do something about it. And I'm not adapting. I'm trying to put in a technical definition and saying the person is rude, therefore not workable, but it doesn't take away the challenge. So the idea is to look at how do I shift the technical frame to an adaptive frame and say, how do I adapt to the fact that this person is in my life? I need to deal with him or her. What is it that I can do to be able to probably find a workable solution? I may not even need to probably get to like that person, but can I make it bearable for both of us, right? What is the conversation I can have, or what is it that I can shift in myself to be able to change this relationship, make it comfortable at least, if not pleasant, right? So that's another concept I want to bring in here in terms of when we're looking at challenges in life, whether it's losing weight, whether it's a health issue or a relationship issue. Are we looking at adaptive challenges through a technical frame? And can we shift the frame and make the frame adaptive and look at different solutions and not a popping pill kind of a solution, not a blaming the person or short-term fixes kind of a solution, right? So that's one sort of frame shifting that we can look at. The third piece, if you're wanting to retain a frame, right, and yet the frame is not quite working for you, you're not, for whatever reason, feeling ready to drop the frame altogether, right, drop the assumption altogether about the situation, A process that you can look at is what is called reframing in NLP. The process starts with identifying the problem. Right? So a problem, for example, could be, let's say, let's continue with the example, high blood pressure. So let's say I have high blood pressure and I need to figure out how to reduce or manage or control it in some ways. Right? And while popping a pill is a solution, it's not very sustainable in the long run, right? So the problem that I've identified is high blood pressure, and how do I, in a reasonable way, heal it? The first step is, if you're working with somebody else, you can, and if you're doing this process for somebody else as a client, for example, you get the person into a reasonably meditative state, right? Which could simply be about sitting back, eyes closed, relaxed, physically relaxed. It doesn't have to be meditation in the heavy sense of the term. Right? Get the person into a calm state, let the person's arms rest on their body, and when the person is calm enough, maybe use some meditative music to be able to calm the person down, and in a very simple, soft voice, instruct the person that I am now going to be speaking with your unconscious, with parts of you that you normally don't have access to. We are not operating at the thought level, but at the level of the unconscious. Work through that and instruct the person that let the unconscious and let the body guide the process, and give me a finger signal. Okay, so let's say the person's hand is on his or her lap. Ask the unconscious of the person, and this is the verbal instruction that you give, that unconscious, move a finger in a manner that indicates no, right? And that finger movement will be really soft. If it's not a conscious signal that we are asking. So we are not asking the person, okay, move your middle finger up so that I know it's a no, right? That's not what you're asking. You're saying let the body develop an unconscious signal when it wants to indicate no. And typically it's a quick quiver or a very slight shift or a movement in one of the fingers that will indicate a no. Similarly, ask the unconscious to give an indication for yes by moving another finger. Right? So it's possible that a quiver in the last finger means a no, and maybe this middle finger means a yes, right? And it could be different for different people that you work with. If you want to operate or use this process on yourself, you don't have to work with a finger signal. You simply sit back, close your eyes and relax, and ask your body to give an internal signal for a yes. Okay, when the body wants to say yes, it will signal you in a particular way, and typically internal signals come either in the form of a sensation. Some part of your body feels hot or cold, or there's a tingling, or there's an itching that happens, that means a yes or a no. Right? It could sometimes be a muscular contraction. It could be a certain part of the body feeling tight or loose at some point in time. So ask your body for internal signals to indicate no or yes. Okay? We are asking for this yes or no signals internally or externally for another person, because we're not going to have conversations in the process of reframing. We're simply going to work with the body. Okay? So first step, establish the yes or no signals, either internally or with the finger if you're working with another person. Right? Then continue to speak with the unconscious of the person and ask, is there a useful intention for this problem? So if I'm working with you, for example, the first step would be for me to get you into a meditative state. Ask your unconscious to establish yes or no signals through finger movements, and of course remember them because I have to work with that, right? And let you be in that meditative state. We're not having a conversation in the process, but I'm speaking with her unconscious now and asking her unconscious, is there a useful intention for having this high blood pressure? Right? And the unconscious, and instruct the unconscious, remind the unconscious that you have to give a finger signal, either yes or a no. Right? And the unconscious might say, no, there is no useful intention for it. And very often the unconscious will say, yes, there is a useful intention. The body is calling out for attention when it's having high blood pressure or any physical issue for that matter. Right? So ask the body to give a yes or a no signal for to find out if there's a useful intention. If there is a useful intention, and in most cases there is, right, ask the unconscious to find at least 3 healthy ecological ways to fulfill this intention. We don't have to know what the intention is. The body has its reason for increasing blood pressure at certain points in time, right? It's a defense mechanism, right? The body doesn't want you to react too much or become too angry at a certain situation, and therefore it elevates blood pressure as a way of signaling that get out of that situation, don't stay with that situation or that person. So there is always a useful intention. So ask the unconscious to find at least 3 healthful ecological ways to fulfill this intention without it having to be high blood pressure. And wait for a while. Sometimes it takes a few minutes for the body to figure out how else to manage this emotion, this situation without causing high blood pressure. And then once it's ready, it will give you a finger signal of yes or no. So if I'm watching her and I'm watching her fingers, I will know if it's lifted the yes finger or the no finger. Some cases the body might give a no finger, which means it says that I can't find 3 healthy ways. Look at 2 healthy ways, look at least 1 healthy way. In most cases that I've worked with, the unconscious does find 3 healthy ways. So it's not very difficult to do that. Wait for the unconscious to give a yes signal. If necessary, prompt after a few minutes and ask unconscious, have you found a way to have at least 3 healthy ecological ways to fulfill the intention of that blood pressure, high blood pressure. Then ask the unconscious to continue, the person continues to remain in that state, and ask the unconscious to implement the changes, which means it rewires the body, it rewires the brain, and it instructs the brain that next time you're in this situation, you will not respond with high blood pressure, but with another healthier way of expression, right? Now that healthier expression could sometimes be the person learning to be more assertive, learning to speak up and not tolerate the situation, maybe learning to express himself or herself in a different way. The body will find its own ways. So ask the unconscious to simply rewire, which means simply implement the changes in the body, and do a recheck. Ask the unconscious, are these changes that are implemented, are they healthy and good for the person? Wait for a yes or a no signal. Okay. So typically this process will take a few minutes. I'm describing it very fast, but when you're doing it with a person, do it really slowly and softly. Okay. And once the unconscious says yes, and in some cases if it says no, which means it says it's not a healthy change to implement, you can ask the unconscious to roll back the changes, look for 3 other options, and then implement. It's a very rare occurrence, but sometimes it can happen. Right? And then agree on a time frame to heal. Now what we have done in this process is to rewire the brain. It's a programming the brain differently, right? It is important here to now start manifesting those changes in reality, right? So the brain needs to also be instructed that, okay, till now I have responded to certain people or situations with high blood pressure. Now I have to start responding differently. I have to change the frame, right? So ask for a time frame and ask the unconscious that, will you be able to implement these changes, let's say within 1 month of today? Right? Wait for a yes or a no. And look at a reasonable time frame, right? So if you've had high blood pressure all your life, it's not very reasonable for the body to say, okay, do it now. Right? You need to give it some time to peter down, some time for the body to also reconcile and rewire itself. So ask for a few weeks, maybe a month, maybe 15 days, whatever is reasonable considering the problem that you have looked at. Right? And wait for so ask the unconscious, are you willing to implement these changes within 1 month from today, or within 15 days from today, within whatever time frame you consider is okay at that point in time. Wait for the unconscious again to give a finger signal, yes or no. At no point are we having a conversation here. And ask for the unconscious for a full commitment to this process to be able to reframe the issue, which means respond differently to a situation. So you're no longer responding with high blood pressure, but you're responding in a healthier, more ecological manner. So it can be an extremely powerful process, either done with yourself, or you could do it with somebody else. When you're doing it with somebody else, please be completely attentive and with the person, speak softly, and at any point in time, remember you're not entering into a conversation with the person, you're addressing the unconscious. So you're actually using this language and saying, unconscious, can you find 3 healthy ecological ways? Unconscious, can you commit to implementing this in a month, right? So you're speaking to the unconscious. You're not taking the name of the person and speaking at any point in time. The idea is to engage directly with the wiring of the brain and not with the thought level of the person, which could be very limiting. And in this process, you change the frame. So what happens in the process is the person, when he or she, typically high blood pressure happens in certain situations which the person thinks is stressful, right? So if I've climbed, let's say 5 floors through stairs, it can be a cause for high blood pressure because my frame is climbing stairs is very stressful for the body and therefore body responds with high blood pressure. Now I'm shifting the frame to saying, no, it's not necessary that climbing 5 floors is stressful for the body, so the body now starts responding very differently. It may still feel tired at the end of it, but it's not shooting up blood pressure. Right? So reframing is a good and a powerful way of working with frames if you simply want to alter the frame and not drop it altogether. But the invitation is, of course, to also look at how do you drop the frames eventually at some point in time. So once you get used to the idea of working with frames, then it becomes easier to instantly recognize the frame and drop it. Right? What does dropping the frame mean? It's like, if you can imagine like a ballroom dance, right, or even a garba or a dandiya, right, in our context, right. When you're in the field and dancing, when you're on the dance floor and dancing, can you see everybody else around? You can't, right? You can see people surrounding you, but if it's a large field, you can't see everybody. Right? However, if it happens to be in a hall and people are dancing on the ground floor and you happen to be on a balcony on the first floor, can you now see the entire dance? Now you can, right? Because now you're not in the middle of it, you're above it. It's like a helicopter view. Right? So the idea of dropping the frame is about eventually building this capability to be in the dance and on the balcony simultaneously. You're in the situation, but you're also observing what is my frame, how am I operating in this situation, what are the assumptions I'm making when I'm in this situation, and constantly looking at saying, is this frame useful, not useful, drop, look at it without a frame and see how differently I perform, how differently I behave in the situation, right? So the long-term intention, of course, is to drop the frame and work outside of it. But while we are with our frames, it also helps to reframe once in a while to at least make it healthier for us and not make it physically reactive in a manner that's not good for us. Okay. And there are huge cases of transformation that can happen through these processes. I mean, it can be used for dropping addictions, like something like giving up smoking. Right? So if I'm a smoker, the frame that I have when I want a cigarette is that, oh, I'm feeling low, I need a nicotine burst and therefore I want to smoke. Or I've just had lunch, I need something to digest my food and the answer is a cigarette, right? So there is a certain frame that's operating. There's an assumption every time I'm taking out a cigarette, right? So if I'm able to drop the frame, then the habit drops. So you can use it for various kinds of transformation, including health issues, dropping weight, getting over addictions, shifting nature of relationships. If it's unhealthy or difficult to deal with, how can you make it comfortable if not pleasant? Right? So there are various kinds of transformation that you can work with using the concept of frames and being aware of it simply. Right? So long term, as I said, the idea is learn to be in the dance and on the balcony simultaneously. Watch yourself, but watch yourself from a height simultaneously. But in the meanwhile, reframe as well. Yes?
Change the frame and the picture changes.
Yeah. And that is the intention here, right? We want, the whole idea of transformation is you want to change the picture because you don't like the way it is now, right? And yeah, so if you change the frame, the picture will become better. certainly. Right, so that's all I had to share for today. Thank you.